What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode. This week, we've got Craig Warmke, who is an associate professor of philosophy at Northern Illinois University. He is one of the authors of the upcoming book, Resistance Money, A Philosophical Case for Bitcoin. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. It's really good to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
That was the most official introduction.
That
of the
was
entire
by
podcast.
far the most official introduction ever. Usually it's me like, hey guys, what's up? How you been? So yeah, this is good. We're excited because this is going to be a little bit different than most of the episodes we have done in the past, because we are typically talking to a lot of miners, and we've had like Parker Lewis on and some other folks that I think we get into more of the kind of philosophical discussion around Bitcoin and why we like it and why we think it's going to be the money of the future and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to bring a different angle, which I know we're both excited about. So, and I think getting to talk some of the metaphysics stuff and how it kind of brought you to Bitcoin will be fun to chat about too. So thank you for coming on, man.
Hey, so glad to be here. So it's Jake and Justin. So what are some of your backgrounds?
Well, Jake, you want to give yours first?
Yeah, absolutely. I came into the energy space, particularly oil and gas, about a decade ago. Got out of the Marine Corps and landed in oil and gas very accidentally through pursuing technology, and just very serendipitously ended up in a space building cloud software for energy companies. And then rinsed and repeated a few different times, and then started an oil and gas company at a small scale. And then once again, get back to the technology side, and then co-founded Digital Wildcatters about 6 years ago. All of this started as a podcast around technology and the energy space. Then we got orange pilled. Then we saw Bitcoin mining as energy infrastructure. Then we launched the Empower conference. Then we launched this podcast like 2 years ago. So that's a super short, condensed version of, I guess, my background.
And awesome. I am an energy attorney. I'm like the Forrest Gump of this world, though, I feel like. So I've had so many different jobs and careers in the past, but I did a lot of different things. Came from the Midwest, like I was mentioned to you before the show, and got into oil and gas, and we ended up having a need to get rid of some flare gas, and that's kind of what led me to Bitcoin mining. We were one of the early ones that brought a Bitcoin mine out to a stranded well site we had in Wyoming. And so it just kind of, I realized that it was, very honestly, it was just an opportunity to make some money with it. And then it kind of evolved into more of a belief, and why I'm interested to talk to you, it was more of what I felt like was, as weird as it may sound to some people, was like a spiritual calling for me. Sure. And so that really kind of caused me to dive into it more, and now I'm like fully in on every aspect of it, and I'm going all in. So
Bitcoin can be seen as kind of like a religion.
It can, and what I like about it is the kind of the sovereignty aspect, and the way that I think it can provide people with using their time for other avenues in their life that are a lot more valuable to them, which ends up being a lot more valuable to everybody, because it frees up time that we spend on this freaking churning wheel for things that don't have any type of intrinsic value for most of us. And so I think it opens the door to a lot of good happening from people having a lot more freedom of their time. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, my story is similar. I went to Bible school, first of all. So this is a non-traditional path to being a philosophy professor. I went to Bible school, and I was much more concerned about the state of my soul at the time. This is before Bitcoin was invented.
Which school did you go to?
Yeah, what school was it?
I went to a small Bible college in Chicago called Moody Bible Institute.
Okay.
At the time, we had about 1,500 students. It's right downtown. But I went going in thinking that I would be some sort of intellectual. I wanted to write. I still just love writing, and that's what gets me up every day. But near the end of my time, when it came to choose a field to apply to graduate school, my brother had already um, been doing a master's degree in philosophy here at Northern Illinois. And I really liked the topics that he was working on, as well as the mode of argumentation uh, that was prevalent in the field compared to the mode of argumentation which I had gotten used to in like biblical studies and theology. Um, I found the arguments more compelling, more interesting. And so I decided near the end of my studies at Moody to also go to Northern Illinois and do a master's degree. And the reason my brother went, and the reason why I'm here now, so many of my um, current colleagues were my former teachers. But the reason why I came here as a student, and the reason why someone like Troy Cross, who also did a master's degree in philosophy here at Northern Illinois, I
Oh,
don't know if
okay.
you know Troy,
Well, I
but
know who he is. Yeah.
yeah, so Northern Illinois has one of the top few terminal master's programs in philosophy. And so it's for people with less prestigious undergraduate degrees, people who didn't study philosophy, to use as a springboard to catapult them into a top PhD program in philosophy. Um, and so that's what I did. So I came here and I studied philosophy, and then I ended up doing my PhD at UNC and working on philosophy of mathematics and philosophical logic. And I was in my job here at NIU for 2 or 3 years, halfway through my tenure clock. And a few different things had happened by that time. Number one, the state of the field had changed. So there just were fewer people working in these core abstract areas of philosophy that most interested me. And that's because of the way that hiring had gone over several years. People were working on philosophy of race and gender and other social issues and more like politicized topics in
Mhm.
philosophy. And that didn't really interest me as much. And then also so this is over winter break. That bridged 2017 to 18. Um, I was feeling kind of lonely intellectually, and uh, around that time, some philosophers on Facebook were arguing about whether or not Bitcoin was a bubble. And I thought, that's a really interesting question. It's not so much a philosophical question, but it is a really interesting one that we could probably make some progress in getting to the bottom to, because what that question is really about is whether Bitcoin offers something valuable that justifies at the time its skyrocketing price. And so over the next couple of months,
What year was
I do,
this? I'm sorry to interrupt. What year was it? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
so by the time I was going deep down the rabbit hole, this was like January 2018,
Hmm.
and I and so so Bitcoin had already seen its top.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I'm one of these people who, it came in with all the media attention and all the other kinds of attention, and got swept in. And then uh, just started to study Bitcoin all through the bear market. But within a few months, I thought, I have a couple options here. I could continue to work on the things I was working on. My kids would never understand the work I'm doing, probably, or at least if they did, it'd be really burdensome for them to try to read through it and understand it. Um, and I wouldn't have very many people to talk to um, about the work I was doing, and I just didn't want to write for an audience of 5 to 10 people for that much longer. Or I could dive into this highly interdisciplinary thing, Bitcoin, which ties in economics and in philosophy and computer science, um, and more than I had imagined at the time. So like the energy issues with respect to Bitcoin, I hadn't really thought about at the time. And I read the white paper and I thought, you know what, this is uh, something that alters the trajectory of the world. And if I could make a small dent in that trajectory by helping people understand it, that would really be worth my time. That would be something that I would be proud of, that I would like to spend my resources and devote my writing time to. So in 2018, midway through my tenure clock, which is pretty risky, I decided just to work basically full time on Bitcoin as a philosopher. And I mentioned that I was working on philosophy of mathematics and philosophical logic. I was trained as a metaphysician, so on questions about how the world is fundamentally put together,
Mm.
what exists, and I thought, well,
Gosh, this stuff's
maybe I can,
awesome, man.
yeah, yeah. So maybe I can start by asking these questions about the Bitcoin network, about the asset, which we call Bitcoin. And this would accomplish two purposes at the same time for me. Number one, it would help me learn deeply how Bitcoin works and how Bitcoin is put together and how Bitcoin fits in among other assets. And then, secondly, it would give me a kind of foothold to talk to other people who are interested in Bitcoin. And so I wrote these papers about Bitcoin, about what Bitcoin is and how it works. And then, and I hadn't yet published them, but I was at the University of Pittsburgh in the spring of 2019. So I'm about a year into it at this point. And this is just a pure metaphysics conference. But the conference organizer is expecting a paper in metaphysics from me about like complicated stuff and philosophical logic and so on, and possibility and necessity. And I asked her, like, what if I give a talk on Bitcoin? And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever, go for it. So I did. So I delivered this talk entitled "What is Bitcoin?" And unbeknownst to me, one of my friends who was in the audience, and this is at the University of Pittsburgh, comes up to me afterwards and says, I didn't know that you were interested in Bitcoin. And I said, I didn't know that you were interested in Bitcoin. So then we ended up talking for several hours. And this person is Bradley Rettler, who's a philosophy professor at the University of Wyoming. And I had actually known Bradley for quite some time. I think we had exchanged emails going back to 2008 or earlier. And his best friend and his roommate, while they were doing their PhD at the University of Notre Dame, was Andrew Bailey. And they had an interest in Bitcoin together going back to 2013 or so. And it was soon after that fortuitous meeting that we decided to write papers together about Bitcoin. And we published two more papers together that eventually came out in like 2021. But we met some resistance. So the editor of the journal wanted us to concentrate more on cryptocurrency overall or blockchain overall. And this is a fairly common response we get among academics, because it's like, trying to publish a paper in philosophy which covers the most general, principles and topics about how the world is governed and what exists. And then you're like, I want to write a paper on Pepsi or Apple, like a
Yeah.
brand. Bitcoin does have a brand. And so this response is not unjustified. And then at the same time, as we're working on these things, there's the kind of draconian regulatory response to Facebook's Libra.
Mhm.
There are further negative responses to Bitcoin specifically. And then we thought, well, you know what? Maybe we should turn our attention not just to what Bitcoin is and how it works and how it fits in with other assets, but is it good? Is it important? And it took us about 4 years, but eventually the three of us produced a book. It's called Resistance Money, a philosophical case for Bitcoin. And we use all the philosophical tools and skills that we gained throughout our 8 to 10 years of graduate school and applied it to Bitcoin in an accessible and fun way so that we can push the needle just a little bit forward so that people can see that you don't need to buy Bitcoin. You don't need to agree with all kinds of different Bitcoin influencers about certain principles of economics. But we think the evidence does show that Bitcoin is overall good for the world. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from and where my co-authors and I are coming from collectively.
Well, can we dive right into it and kind of ask you without giving away everything in the book? 'Cause
Maybe we
obviously-
should. Why don't we start with the counter arguments that you had to overcome?
Yeah, and I wanted to see kind of, especially being in academia, like there is probably a lot of pushback from portions of academia that you probably work with, at least at the
Sure.
same school, in regards to the energy consumption, because that's typically from academia, at least that the thing that I
Yeah.
see as like the number one argument is like, oh, the energy use is bad, and so therefore Bitcoin's bad. Yeah, what are some of the pushback things you get from folks?
Yeah, it depends on where they're coming from. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, I have a fairly supportive environment here at Northern Illinois. So my dean, for example, the dean of the school or the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, he's actually an academic who works in like environmental ethics and sustainability. And he's completely hands off. We never even talked about it. You know, he has
Yeah.
no interest in my research, and
Yeah.
I'm not even sure he knows who I am, and I like to keep it that way. But you know, in 2018, I think I might have submitted a document for like my um, personnel evaluation from the rest of my department for the other philosophers to evaluate me as I was trying to earn tenure towards my tenure case. And I think I mentioned, you know, I think I'm going to start writing on Bitcoin. And let me preface what I'm about to say with this one remark, which is that I'm probably the least kind person among all my colleagues. And so what
You
they
seem
did
super
next was
kind, which is weird.
Yeah, this must be like the nicest place in the world.
they're incredible. There's like no internal strife. Everyone's super accommodating and kind. It is a fairly special department. You know, we have a good atmosphere here. And so what they did next was it comes from a place of kindness. I think that they were afraid I had gone off the deep end. And so one of them emailed me and said, "Hey, you know, can I take you out to lunch?" And I'm pretty sure I've never confirmed. Maybe I should because I know this person fairly well, but I've been afraid to confirm. You know, but it was pretty clear that the faculty wanted to know if I'd gone nuts, and to try to like talk me off the ledge in case I had. And
Is that a common thing in your field for people to just go off the deep end?
well, you know what people say about academics, which is that
Yeah.
you know, it's a good thing that universities exist because they're like the new version of mental hospitals. Like all the maladjusted and mentally ill people, they congregate and they write these papers that no one reads because it keeps them busy from unleashing the more destructive forces out in the world.
Right.
Yeah. So it happens from time to time. And I've known a few cases, but you know, I explained, you know, why I thought Bitcoin was important and why I wanted to do this, and why I was hungry for some collaboration and discussion with very smart people like outside the traditional confines of philosophy. And they were highly amenable, and they've been very supportive. Now, outside of my department, the response is more mixed, to put it mildly. So I'll give you an example. So when we were first shopping the proposal for our book, which is it's written not necessarily for the Bitcoin fanatic.
Mhm.
It's written for the open-minded person who doesn't have, you know, very strong ideological commitments, or even if they do, the book can still reach them where they are, just with evidence, with data, with
Hmm.
solid arguments, and that almost anyone can buy. Now,
That's who needs to
uh,
hear it, though, right? That's the
I
audience to
I
me.
think
That's the most
so.
important one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But so we sent our book proposal to like all the top presses in academic philosophy. I won't name them because of what I'm about to say next. So we sent our book proposal to the top philosophy press, and they gave us a revise and resubmit, which is exactly like it sounds. You revise the proposal according to their suggestions and comments, and then you resubmit it, and then they give you the thumbs up or thumbs down or another revise and resubmit. Well, we gave them the revised book proposal, and then they sent it back with another request for revisions. And so we revised it again and we submitted it again, and then they completely ghosted us.
What kind of
No,
revisions were they asking for? Were these like
yeah.
reasonable things, or were these things that totally just steered the thesis of the book in a different direction?
The one thing that they wanted us to do was to not make a positive case for Bitcoin, no matter how qualified or reasonable it was. They wanted us just to say, like, this is what Bitcoin is, and we think that's less interesting.
Yeah.
And I think
Well, and isn't
very,
that kind of against the concept of philosophy? Like, wouldn't part of what you do to have to make a case to back up your philosophy on it?
yeah, philosophers make cases all the time
Right.
for things that are, in my view, um, much crazier,
Yeah. Right.
and
Right.
and they don't receive often this kind of pushback,
Hmm.
and so this is the kind of prevailing attitude. It's either disinterest or kind of low level background animosity because of the um, kinds of criticisms and objections that they've seen from the New York Times,
Hmm.
from Elizabeth Warren, and so Bitcoin does have a political stink to it because
Yeah.
of its early associations, which is understandable. Philosophers are fundamentally conservative. They've been working on the same questions for thousands of years. Um, and philosophers, just like most other academics, are left leaning.
Yeah.
And so you just have the recipe for this kind of response. It's teed up. And so, of course, at first glance, they're not going to be overly positive and
Mhm.
responding to a book proposal like this. Um, but we thought that, they'd at least give us a response or at least let us make the case.
Yeah.
Philosophers say false things all the time, and philosophical disagreement is pervasive. So much so that philosophers have become famous and influential for saying that philosophy is useless because the disagreements are intractable.
Mhm.
So we did end up finding a supportive academic press in Rutledge. They do happen to be one of the top academic presses, and we think that's important for our book because for a lot of people, having the stamp of approval from an academic press is it's a sign of credibility.
Right.
So you have people with real PhDs from real universities writing a book that made its way through peer review um, at a top academic press. People are the people that Bitcoiners want to reach next in this next step of adoption. Um, that's the kind of credibility I think that's important to bring to the table. And that's not to say anything critical about the books and people who have come so far. They've gotten to us where we are. But now, how do you convince your parents and siblings and university professors and policymakers, people who don't ascribe to Austrian economics, people who don't want to end the Fed, people who don't already hold Bitcoin? How
Mhm.
can we convince them? And we think that we bring this kind of credibility. That's where we're coming from. So there's quite a bit of animosity, but we think that the arguments speak for themselves.
Right. Yeah, and kind of on the unfortunate part about the political stink to Bitcoin, it's just an unfortunate reality that things like it are going to get dragged into it. But why do you think, and I'm sorry to, I don't know if this is covered in your book or not, but a lot of the people on the left that are anti-Bitcoin, because there's, they're in my mind, they're a complete misunderstanding of energy consumption, how renewable projects actually come to market, and then that energy is delivered to a consumer, and the kind of vastly superior customer Bitcoin mining is for those type of projects. Like that's a lack of understanding. But then if you look at another kind of staple of that platform on the left is like anti-banks, big banks and all that. That also should be that's a case for Bitcoin for them. And so is it just a lack of education around it? But then it feels like they don't have any desire to learn about it. Like it's an open animosity towards the whole subject in general. And so is that is that what you're finding? Or like, are they open to discussions about the kind of the banking side of it? Because that's one, to me, it's like Elizabeth Warren should be all for it. She should be all for it.
Sure.
She was involved in commerce and in oversight of the banking system. Like, this should be something she should be all for.
Great question. So, two things. Number one, when you look at data about who actually holds Bitcoin, it does look like holding Bitcoin is a fairly apolitical thing to do. So you do, especially amongst younger people, you see a lot of left-leaning people who aren't hostile to Bitcoin. In fact, they like it.
Right.
So that's one thing. But there is another aspect of it, which is that Elizabeth Warren is a progressive, and there is a strain of progressivism which favors government intervention and government control through democratic means, but nonetheless, government control over the things that touch people's lives. And so here's Bitcoin, which is not corporate money, true, but it's also not state money. And I think that's where Elizabeth Warren is coming from. It's not something that the state can control. It's not subject to democratic intervention. And so as a result, it looks like a threat to what Elizabeth Warren sees as the good. So
that makes me even more convinced I'll never agree with her ever. That's not.
Yeah, she never. Yeah, I think it's convincing diehard skeptics like Elizabeth Warren will not come through rational means.
Right.
It will come through the passions. And I mean that in the ancient sense of the passions as like desire. So what does Elizabeth Warren really want? Well, she wants to remain in power. She wants to remain in power. Yeah, of course. This isn't an anti-Elizabeth Warren's creed. And if someday she can retain her job and do what she wants to do to benefit her constituents by accepting donations from Bitcoin companies and the Bitcoin industry, then she may step off a bit. And so, but I don't think an argument or a book will convince her. Now, to your point earlier about whether or not there's just some misunderstanding or ignorance amongst policymakers and regulators and other people, I think to some extent, yes, that's true.
It's funny, at the time of recording, it'll be a little bit outdated by the time we release the episode, but this week, I'm sure you guys saw it, the Trump campaign started announcing that they're accepting Bitcoin, and he made a few other comments. It was very obvious that it was pandering to somebody's feeding this guy some lies to pander to like the Bitcoin community.
Was that done at the Libertarian Convention?
I don't know if it was at the convention or it just so happened
to be right before it.
Yeah, he said something about pardoning Ross Ulbricht and a few other things. Oh, and being against CBDCs, which obviously I support that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's that season, right? It's campaign season, so everybody's trying to. Some people are making their hardline stances against it. Some people are saying, "Well, fuck it." I mean, same with RFK, right?
But I think to your point, that is probably an example because Trump was anti-Bitcoin and anti-crypto and all that stuff just not very long ago. And but to your point, I guess that shows kind of well, if I can profit off of this and give me a chance to get more power by bringing this into my fold, then all of a sudden it's okay.
Yeah. So the very steps I just outlined with respect to Elizabeth Warren's becoming friendly, Trump just went through.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's important to realize for two reasons. Number one, he's not
a philosopher.
Well, this is clearly opportunistic.
Right.
You know? And he might
Trump?
push for
wait, what? You think he's opportunistic?
Yeah. So I would hesitate to put my eggs in the Trump basket, hoping for a friendly regulatory environment for Bitcoin. That may not happen. I mean, it could happen. I wouldn't rule it out, but it may not. And number two, politicians can be convinced.
Right.
And I think with what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, politicians can be convinced on both sides. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the kind of work that Coin Center does, the kind of work that the Bitcoin Policy Institute does is highly important because there are still hearts and minds, especially minds that, and that's MINDS, not MINES. They can still be won over, not through, sneaky kinds of persuasion, but just with simple arguments that actually reflect how the world actually works.
Yeah, and I think Schumer even came out. There was something Schumer was involved with just the other day, and I can't remember what it was, but it was really kind of shocking that he would be moved to this side that he moved on. And crap, I wish I could remember.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is.
We need a Jamie like Joe Rogan to
Young
just
Jamie.
look this stuff up. But I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, and I put zero faith in any politician at all. He knows how I'm like an anti-government, basically like anarchist, just a tinge to not being towards being an anarchist, but or away from one.
A better way to put it is you're like a founding father.
Yeah, okay. That sounds better.
There you go.
But I put zero faith in politicians, and I feel like people, as a society and as a constituency, we need to be much more vocal on demanding certain things. I feel like the shift of powers went from people to government and politicians already. So I could go on all day about it, but going back to your stuff, I want to know the tie between kind of metaphysics or your I guess your founding background or your foundational background and Bitcoin. Like, what is there ties between it all? Like the mathematics, philosophy, and all that kind of like how does that fit with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so especially in metaphysics, so these like what is questions or the natures of things. So my first paper I wrote, it's called "What is Bitcoin?" It's in my pinned tweet, and there I present a model, and what I mean by that is I present basically an analogy, and what I do is I say, imagine that there's a bunch of people. There are a bunch of people, and they want to co-author a really boring digital book together. And it's about two things. One is a substance, call it bread. And then the other kind of thing are these baskets. Okay. And then the only thing that you can do within the story is either receive bread in your basket or pass that bread along into some one or more baskets. And I set it all up. And then I say, okay, how is this different from the Bitcoin network? Okay. And in all fundamental respects, it's not. Because in the model, we're using public key cryptography, for the private keys to unlock the ability to write a new sentence in the book that updates about every 10 minutes with a new chapter of sentences. There is a publishing competition to publish those chapters around every 2 minutes. And that competition involves computation through proof of work. And so what I argue is that Bitcoin, the asset, is just like bread in the story. It's an abstract substance. It's actually a fictional substance. What else could it be? It's not gold. It's not a physical substance. And it's not purely abstract like numbers. Numbers just sit there forever, eternally. They don't change. But what sorts of things are more abstract, but they actually change as updates to a publication unfold? Fictional characters, fictional substances. And so I think Bitcoin is a fictional substance. I think that miners are competitive publishers. Nodes, these full nodes that they referee these sentences or transactions. So nodes are like referees in an academic press or an academic journal, so on. And then users like you and I who sling Bitcoin around within the story are co-authors. We're authoring these sentences, which we also conceive of as transactions. That outside of the story, if you receive, some of this fictional substance in one of your, quote, baskets, you can trade some goods or services for it, or US dollars. And that happens external to the story, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got started in thinking about Bitcoin, is thinking about a way to present it. Satoshi says at some point that there's really nothing comparable to Bitcoin. It's bloody hard to explain. So this was my attempt to try to explain Bitcoin and compare it to something that we already know, to give new people some traction to understand what's going on with the Bitcoin network. So the Bitcoin network then is a network for what you might think of as hyper authorship. There's just thousands of co-authors. The network enables this participation. And otherwise, it's really hard to co-author on a massive scale because you get people trying to erase other people's sentences. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to collaborate in like a Google Doc, but
I hate Google Docs because I feel like everybody else is coming in there and messing with us sometimes. So yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so what Bitcoin enables you to do is to have a shared space to co-author where you can't erase or alter other people's sentences. You can only add your own. But the rules of the network ensure that anytime any user submits a sentence, it has to cohere with everything that's come before.
That makes sense. That does. So what is I wish I would have read the book first, and I'm sorry, we just didn't have enough time to do it, but what is kind of your philosophical case for Bitcoin?
Great. After I describe it here, I think you'll want to read it.
I want to read it already. I'm a nerd.
So, unlike most philosophy books, this is very self-serving, but it's easy. It's easy to read. It's easy to read. It's fun. We put quite a bit of humor in. I think that we say things that will surprise people. So, After we explain where Bitcoin came from, its origins, after we explain how it works and how it fits in among other assets, then we present a thought experiment. So here's the thought experiment. Suppose you take a pill, and the pill does this. It erases all your memories about who you are. You don't know what your
I
name
might have
is.
taken one of those, man.
You might have taken a few of those.
You don't know who you are. You don't know who your parents are, where you live, where you were born, what color your skin is, which God you worship. Absolutely nothing. But you wake up in darkness and you hear this voice that says, you took this pill, you agreed to it, and you don't remember anything about yourself, but you are one of the 8 billion people currently alive. You just don't know which. And you have one task before we put you back in. You have to decide whether you'd rather go back into the world with Bitcoin or go back into a world where Bitcoin has been erased from existence. That's your decision. That's all you have to decide. And your job, while you're behind this so-called veil of ignorance, is to weigh all the evidence about whether or not you'd be better off going back into the Bitcoin world or the non-Bitcoin world, not knowing who you were. And so what we do then for the next several chapters is we go through all the data that you'd have to run through within this thought experiment. So all the data and stories about financial censorship, financial exclusion, privacy, financial privacy, and then all of Bitcoin's positive and negative externalities, including its energy use and carbon emissions. And then we have a penultimate chapter, the second to last chapter, where we cover all the other objections that we haven't covered so far. And so it's just like an anti-Bitcoin chapter, basically, where we go through all the remaining objections. And then we say, okay, at least for us, as we've gone through all the data, and as we've gone through all the arguments, we would prefer to go back to the Bitcoin world. Why? Well, for reasons like this. You'd have basically a 1 in 2 chance of living under an authoritarian government. You'd have a very good chance of living under an irresponsible central bank, or at least under a central bank whose currency experiences routine runaway inflation. You'd have basically a 1 in 16 chance of being someone who would benefit from using a permissionless global internet native currency that you just otherwise wouldn't have access to anything similar. So these are people like in India that don't have a bank nearby. They have a phone, they have internet access, but they have no bank. And the financial system as it is now runs on debt through the banking system. Okay, so these electronic dollars that we use just are claims on dollars. And so we run through this. We run through the arguments about Bitcoin's energy use and emissions. We say, look, Bitcoin isn't perfect. There are good arguments against Bitcoin. But overall, if you have to make this decision, you're going to probably choose the Bitcoin world. Okay, and so where does that put you? Once you leave from behind the veil of ignorance and you rediscover who you are, you should think, wow, Bitcoin exists. I'm glad that it exists because behind the veil, I would have wanted it to exist. And now I found out that it does. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means you might support the Bitcoin network. It might mean that you buy some, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It might mean that for a lot of people, you just stop fighting it because you're not fighting against something that's bad.
Yeah.
It's good. And fighting against good things is bad.
Yeah.
So you can put the weapons down.
That's a great way to put it. It's actually
It's a beautiful frame to go into a book that way, because now you're putting everything through this perspective.
And it's what I feel like too. It's like we've talked about on here many times, is that it's easy for us being in the US with the luxuries we have and the dominant currency worldwide that we live under and that we get access to and we use on a daily basis. It's easy for us, for the opponents of Bitcoin, to look at it and be like, we don't need this, this is stupid, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But when you look on a global scale, we have luxuries that most people do not have. And so I try to tell people that a lot, is like, don't look at this just from like, well, you don't need it. You know what I mean? You're not the one that's, at the whims or living in El Salvador on the US dollar, but have no control over, voting for what the government decides to do with it here in the US, because we end up impacting people worldwide by our decisions. So our inflation, while it sucked, it makes it much, much worse in places that don't have kind of control of their own currency or are impacted by our decisions. And so it's basically the same concept, I think. Am I looking at that right?
Exactly right. So this is just a rigorous way of putting this point.
Yeah.
And so the point you often make, if you were to put it in a slogan, is you need to live in someone else's shoes.
Right.
Right? That's what we often say. You don't know what it's like to be them.
Right.
So the behind the veil argument is a way of opening the aperture of the available data to a global viewpoint. It's global, it's neutral, and your own personal interests and proclivities can't play a role in how you make this decision. You're making the decision for everyone, and not just yourself, because you don't know who you are. You could be the person.
Yeah, you might be the one who sucks that that you're born into this situation. Yeah, dude.
Exactly right. Yeah. So this is all. I mean, so we're not the first to make this point, of course, because you make this point. Alex Gladstein makes this point often.
But you're painting it well.
Check your.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. But this is a new way to do it, and we think this is an important way to do it. So, if you don't mind me giving a small philosophy spiel. So my favorite.
We got you on here, bro.
Yeah, great. So my favorite philosopher is named Gottfried Leibniz. He lived across the 17th and 18th centuries. That's my Leibniz shelf.
Dang.
There he is.
Big book.
Very beautiful man. So he co-invented the calculus. He's arguably one of the smartest people who's ever lived.
Wow.
And but he had views that other people found crazy. So I'll say what one of these views is. So I'm holding up a water bottle, right? Thank you, OKX. Now, the water bottle has color, right? It has a shape. Now, how do you know about those things? Well, just through your sense perception. You can see the color. You can feel the shape. At least I can feel the shape. Okay? It has a particular smell. All of these things are mental qualities. There are other philosophers with similar views, and they'll say things like, what if you stripped away all these sensible qualities? What do you have left? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe nothing. What Leibniz thought is that there is no mind-independent water bottle. Just like in the Matrix, there is no spoon, right? What's the spoon in the Matrix? It is an object in a virtual reality that has no further being outside of that virtual reality. Leibniz thought similarly. For all of physical reality, nothing is fully mind independent outside of our perceiving it. So it's as if we're all living in the matrix. But if you were to unplug, it would just be a party of spirits or
Right.
souls or something, right? Non-spatially located, so the party isn't anywhere. It's just happening. People thinking and perceiving things. Now, there are people that Leibniz spoke to, his fellow intellectuals, who were, say, Catholics or Aristotelians, and they believed that there were physical substances. And they thought Leibniz, as a result, was like heretical. And so Leibniz was put in a position of arguing with people who wouldn't accept whatever he said if he just laid out his views systematically, proposition by proposition. What he had to do it is argue in a roundabout way. And he argued with people differently depending on what they believed and where they were coming from. And so if he were arguing with someone with this view, he would say, okay, what's the distance between where I am and where they are? And how can I get them to take one step closer? I don't need them to take the full path from where they are to where I am. That's impossible, psychologically impossible. It's not going to happen, but I can just get them to take one tiny step. And then if he discusses his views with someone else coming from a different viewpoint, he gets them to take another step from another direction towards his views. That's the kind of strategy I think that's most successful, not only for any controversial topic, especially inflammatory topic, but especially with Bitcoin. So how do we get people to see that Bitcoin is overall good for the world? Not by citing Hayek and Rothbard and the cypherpunks, right? I love the cypherpunks. But how can we get people to see that Bitcoin is overall good for the world because it's good for more people in the world in an important way than it is bad for people?
Honestly, that's like, I don't know. You would know better than I, but that's kind of like Christ's whole deal was. It was like, at least it seemed like that to me. Is talking to people in a way that they are going to understand, and finding a way to get his message across in a way that'll reach whatever particular audience he's talking to. So yeah, I mean, that's two pretty good dudes that would be able to do pretty good with messaging, I guess. So
sure.
yeah,
I mean, Satoshi did this too. So when Satoshi emails the cryptography mailing list, how does he market Bitcoin to them? Well, the holy grail of the cypherpunks, which largely comprised the cryptography mailing list, was digital cash. Okay, and how do you get people with an interest in digital cash to see that the thing that you're creating that's digital cash might appeal to them? Well, by discussing Bitcoin as e-cash or digital peer-to-peer cash. When he emails the P2P Foundation, what does he emphasize first? The lack of trust that's involved in Bitcoin. And so I think this is just, I don't know if this is like a principle in like Dale Carnegie's, like how to win friends and influence people, but it's definitely a strategic and useful rhetorical maneuver to cater your message to the people that you want to convince and that you're talking to. Now, that can sound dirty. It can sound too slick, but we are philosophers and we hang everything on the quality of the arguments. So the arguments are simple. And so if someone were to think that the arguments fail, it should be simple to show that they fail. The rhetorical maneuver is in the simplicity of the argument. That's all. The argument still may fail. Yeah.
Have you met Alana, who did Dirty Coin? Mediaville. I struggle saying her name, but say it.
Mediavia.
Mediavia. Have you met her? She did Dirty
I
Coin?
have. I have
Okay.
briefly. I haven't been able to see the documentary yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful.
It's incredible.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I thought she did great. And you had mentioned Troy earlier, so he's in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you would be great in just being part of that whole discussion. So I mean, I know it's out already.
It's not just like, I mean, I'm just saying this just because we're in it, but
Yeah.
it is one of the best documentaries I've seen, period, from like her storytelling to the pacing to the music. Like I was captivated the entire time, all the way through. And I think it's a very, very compelling story, and I think she does a very, very great job.
She did incredible. And I wish you would have been on there too, talking about some of this, because you're putting it in a very easy to understand way for people, which I don't think is slick. I think it's wise, and I think it is what everyone should do when they're trying to talk to people. If you're trying to help them see something, is like put it in their terms. So yeah, I think this is great.
You know what I really like about the documentary is the title.
Yeah, I do too.
Dirty Coin, because it defangs the biggest objection before you even start watching.
Right.
You know, and so it's a way of agreeing and amplifying to, and it's a way of making the skeptic realize that there might be more to the story. And we do something similar with our book. So the first sentence in our book is that Bitcoin is for criminals. And we've had several early readers say that they felt the same way, that it instantly makes the skeptic feel like they've been heard. You know, like, oh, okay, well, what's next then? If it's for criminals,
Right.
what are the other 300 pages about? Like, how do I? What was the rest for? Yeah,
Man, I'm reading it as soon as we're done. I will start reading this week.
Well, it doesn't come out for until mid-June.
You guys sent us a little pre-read.
You sent us the pre-read.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay. Well, enjoy.
All right.
Yeah.
I've got a big road trip coming up, so I'm gonna have that thing knocked out real quick.
I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so
terrific.
I'm gonna read a copy of it too.
Yeah.
Oh, terrific. I recently took a trip to the West Coast. I surprised my kids. So my little boy had this dream of going to California to sing the redwoods.
Oh, nice.
And so we woke him up early in the morning, along with the others, and we said, "Hey, like, you want to go to California today to like see the redwoods?" You know, it's like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, really, really great.
My mom's family is from the Oregon coast, and so we go out there quite a bit. But that's like, yeah, that whole area right there is literally probably my favorite place in the world. But yeah, man, like I love this. I think I enjoy this kind of stuff. I want to actually stay in touch, because I'm sure there's times I'm gonna freaking hit you up with some questions that pop in my head. Typically, after people ask me questions after they take some of those pills where they forget who they are and all that. But I get got a lot of good ones.
Thanks. Well, we haven't really talked about mining, so so I can always come back and actually talk about mining.
It's a good reason to have you back.
It is, yeah. We need to
Great.
definitely. We should definitely have him back.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and have Misty put on the calendar for a few months out. We'll do a part 2.
Oh, terrific. I like you guys. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well,
Thanks,
we
man.
enjoyed it too.
It's been a blast.
Yeah,
It's a good change of pace for us.
It is very much. Get our little philosophizers wheels turning. So it's good.
Terrific.
Awesome, man. We'll appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Craig.
All right. Thank you.